Milkweed Chapter 20. Some of you may have noticed that our story is getting a little bit darker as we get further along into the ghetto experience of the Jews in Warsaw. Chapter 20. I expected to come back with so much food that I was going to have to push it in one item at a time through the tiny 2-brick hole. But all I could find was a jar of fish chunks. And as I squeezed back through the hole, the jar fell and broke. I picked up the chunks, brushed off the dirt, ate one, and stuffed the rest into my pockets. I went straight to the Milgram's apartment. Uncle Shepsel gave his usual greeting. "Ah, the smelly one!" It was dark outside, but there was electricity this night, and a single light bulb dangled from a cord in the ceiling, and Mrs. Milgram was on the mattress as usual. Mr. Milgram was at the one table, seated in the only chair, doing things with his pills and his bottles, and there was a large purple welt on the side of his neck. It looked like an eggplant. Sidenote, it was probably from being beaten by the flops or the German soldiers on the way to the factory where he worked. When I came in, Gina was laughing. "What's so funny?" I said. You peed yourself." I looked down and the front of my pants was soaked. It was the juice from the fish chunks in my pockets. "I have food," I announced proudly. I pulled the fish chunks from my pockets and put them on the table. Uncle Shepsel picked one up and he sniffed it. "Ah, pickled herring!" I saw Mrs. Milgram. I saw her head rise from the mattress. Uncle Shepsel devoured his piece of fish at once. Mr. Milgram and Janina each grabbed a piece and took it over to Mrs. Milgram. They laughed, seeing that they were both doing the same thing. Mr. Milgram pulled Janina's head into his chest. "I'll see to Mother, don't you worry about her." Janina held her fish chunk up to the light. The skin on one side was silvery, and she turned the chunk over and over, studying it. Then she licked it, as if it were a piece of taffy. She licked each side of it. Finally, she bit off a tiny little piece with her front teeth. And as she chewed, she closed her eyes and smiled dreamily. It took her a long time to finish it. This is what we call to savor. There were only chewing sounds as they ate their chunks of pickled herring fish. Everyone wore coats and hats and scarves, but all had taken off their gloves the better to feel the fish. Their frozen breaths clouded the waxy smear of light. And when the last chunk was gone, Janina pointed at me and she looked angry. "You didn't eat." I was starting to explain that I had had a chunk before I arrived when the sound of a machine gun peppered the night. It was very near, and then there were screams and thuds and running feet and shouts. "Out! Out!" Uncle Shepsel stood in the middle of the room and raised his hands and shouted to the ceiling, "This is it! It's over! This is it!" "Shut up," said Mr. Milgram as he helped his wife up from the mattress. Janina gaped at the door. It was bedlam on the other side. "Open the door," said Mr. Milgram, "before they come in for us." Uncle Shepsel continued to scream at the ceiling, "This is it! This is it!" I was about to open the door when Mr. Milgram said, "No, wait." Slumped against one wall was a large stuffed cloth bag embroidered in a black and green design, and Mr. Milgram reached into the bag and pulled out a blue and white armband. He slipped it over my coat sleeve onto my arm. "I got this for you," he said. I opened the door and people were stampeding by, tumbling down the stairs, screams and shattering glass and gunshots. Sidenote, this is something that the German police would do when they were up late at night and bored and had had too much to drink. They would force all the Jews out into the street. We made our way down to the ground floor and Janina squeezed my hand. I could feel her trembling. Bright lights flooded the courtyard, and I shielded my eyes, and Janina nudged closer to me, and voices shrieked out of the blinding lights. Move! Move, all you filthy sons of Abraham! All you stinking Jews! All you dirty Jewish pigs! Line up! Line up! Lines were forming, like a company of soldiers, and I thought, maybe we're going to be in a parade. We found our places in line and we stood. Silence! Silence! All of you filthy swine! Mr. Milgram whispered, stand up straight. Look healthy. I heard Mrs. Milgram groan. And as we were lining up, snow began to fall from the sky. The flakes were fat and starry in the blinding lights. Stand at attention, Mr. Milgram whispered to me. I didn't pay him much mind. He had no way of knowing how impossible it was for me to stand still. I had never stood still for more than 5 seconds in my life. Nevertheless, I tried. Mr. Milgram was on one side of me. Janina was on the other. The soldiers screamed, and with my new armband, I thought, I'm a Jew now. I am a filthy son of Abraham. They're screaming at me. I am somebody. I tried to listen well, to hear what they were screaming, but I couldn't understand much beyond dirty and filthy and Jew. I couldn't understand the jackboot language. Something happened up in front of the line. The screams got even louder and screechier, and I heard hollow thudding, thunk, thunk, as if someone were knocking wood. I leaned to the side, trying to see past the column of people in front of me, and Mr. Milgram jerked me back. Stand at attention. I was beginning to get the message. Standing at attention was very important. Perhaps someone up at the front of the line wasn't doing it right, and I accepted the challenge. You want attention? Oh, I'll give you attention. I had seen many jackboots stand at attention, and I straightened my spine, I snapped my heels together, I lifted my chin, I stared at the back in front of me, and I gave them the best attention there ever was. And as the screaming went on, I assumed that others weren't so good at this as I. The back I stared at was green. It was a lady with a green coat. Snow kept falling, and sometimes a flake tickled my nose, but I did not twitch. I didn't move my eyes. I barely breathed. Flake by flake, the green shoulders of the lady turned white, and somewhere up front a baby began to scream, and then another to the right, and then another, and the louder the baby screamed, the brighter the lights. You Jew dogs! You filthy pigs! Whack! Fuck! Whack! Jackboots and flops, the Jewish police, came through the lines, screaming into the people's faces, poking them with clubs and rifles, spitting in their faces, and a jackboot stopped in front of Mrs. Milgram, and I could see from the corner of my eye, and he was screaming at her, and she fell to the ground. Get up, you Jew dog! You filthy pig, get up! He screamed. If he wants her to get up, I thought, why is he kicking her and clubbing her? I didn't understand, and at last Mr. Milgram managed to pull her to her feet. The jackboot passed by me and Janina. I think he looked at me, but I couldn't see his face because of the blinding lights behind him, and for an instant I felt proud, as if he had pinned a medal on me for standing at attention so well. And when he came to Uncle Shepsel, he growled, Open your mouth! I heard Uncle Shepsel give a whimpering, Ugh! He must have opened his mouth because I saw the muzzle of a rifle come forward, and I couldn't stand it any longer. I turned my head to see, and I saw the muzzle go into Uncle Shepsel's mouth and push. Uncle Shepsel went backwards into the lady behind him, who in turn fell back into the man behind her, and so forth and so on, and the whole column of people toppled over, and the jackboot laughed. I went back to attention. I didn't want that to happen to me. I had known from the start that the lady in front of me, the green-coated lady, she was in trouble. Her attention was very, very poor. She wavered from side to side, and sometimes her head drooped, and her shoulders were not straight at all. And when a jackboot came to her, he must have seen it also, and down came the club. Thunk! And then another bash across her chest, and the snow went flying from her shoulders into my face, and I hoped the jackboot noticed. I did not move. It wasn't long before the lady's shoulders were white again. Her head was drooping all the time now, and I could hear her sniveling. And the next time a jackboot came to her, he said, "You are a stinking sow. You smell like a pig farm." He clubbed her again, and again the snow flew from her shoulders. And then it seemed all the jackboots were telling the people how bad they smelled. They were holding their noses, and I was shocked. I had thought I was the only one who smelled bad. I sniffed, and I began to smell it myself. I was aware of tiny yips and whimpers erupting around me, and I knew what the smell was. But despite what the jackboot said, there were really no pigs, and therefore there was no pig flop in the courtyard. And then I felt down under my stomach. Ooh. I felt the urge to go, and there was no place to go but where we were standing. And so people just relieved themselves right where they were. And I heard the sad shudders as it ran down their legs and into the snow. And when I couldn't hold my own any longer, I did the same. And even then, I remained at such splendid attention, I was tempted to call out to the jackboots, "Hey, look at me!" The screaming never stopped. And by now, people were falling all over the courtyard, falling and staggering to their feet and falling again. And it was easy to tell the people who had not fallen. They were the ones with the highest piles of snow on their shoulders and heads. I could now feel the faint weight of the snow on my head. I wondered how it looked. I took even more pains not to move. I didn't want any of my snow to fall off. I thought of the stone angel in the cemetery. I pictured the snow falling over it, 2 crests of snow rising on the tops of its wings. So silent, the both of them, the angel and the snow, and I pretended I was the stone angel. And I closed my eyes and I pretended as hard as I could. And after a while, I was so convinced that I was the stone angel that I could feel wings sprouting from my shoulders. I wanted to look. I wanted to look and see my wings. Nope, because I was an angel of stone. And I could not move. And the next thing I knew, my face was in the snow, and Mr. Milgram and Janina were hauling me to my feet. "What happened?" Mr. Milgram smacked me. "Quiet, they'll beat you. You fainted. You're too stiff. Bend your knees a little bit and breathe." This was all getting complicated, not to mention very tiring. I was supposed to move, but I was supposed to stand still. I tried. I bent my knees a little bit, and jackboots screamed, and flops screamed, and babies screamed, and lights were screaming at us, and we stood so long that my pants were now dry. And when they finally let us go, the sky was turning gray above the rooftops. We lurched across the snow. Mobs stampeded for the bathrooms. There was one on each floor. I just didn't understand bathrooms. I had never used one in my life. I never needed one. The world was my bathroom. I dragged myself up the stairs with the Milgrams, Uncle Shepsel, and Mrs. Milgram, performed a groaning duet that grew louder with each step. I followed them into the room. I wanted only to sleep, and I collapsed onto the floor. When I woke up, I thought I was back in the courtyard under the blinding lights, but it was only the sun in the window. And Uncle Shepsel, propped on his elbows, was pointing at me and saying, "Why is he sleeping here? He smells." I regret to inform you," said Mr. Milgram, "that you are not a rose garden yourself these days, Uncle Shepsel." Uncle Shepsel pounded the floor. "He's not family." Mr. Milgram looked straight at him. "He is now." And that's the end of chapter 20.